On the third day after the Guyanci press conference collapsed, almost all financial pages in the city were talking about the Shen family and the Gu family. The stock price of Gu Group continued to fall, and the board of directors of the Gu family began to question Guyanci. The image he had originally created as an affectionate guardian was completely torn apart by the video from Shen Yu'an's private room. Especially the sentence "Shen Yu'an already believes in me." As long as Shen Group transfers the last amount of funds, he will have no way out. It has almost become ironclad evidence that all Guyanci's excuses cannot bypass. However, Shen Yu'an did not relax. He knew very well that Guyanci was not the end, but only the beginning. What really kept him awake at night was not the Gu family's counterattack, but the missing 7 minutes at the scene of the car accident in his previous life. In the Lu family study, the whiteboard was already filled with names and timelines. Shen Mingyuan, Guyanci, Xixin Capital, Liang Qishan, Lu Wenchuan. All the clues are like a web that has been torn apart and put back together again. The closer you get to the core, the more you can smell the rotten smell of death in the previous life. Shen Yu'an stood in front of the whiteboard, holding the screenshot of the garage surveillance in his hand. The picture is blurry, the rain is heavy, and only an outline of Lu Chenzhou is left under the black umbrella. But it was that outline that made him dream about the rainy night in his previous life for several nights in a row. He once thought he would die alone, like a chess piece that was discarded after being used. But Lu Chenzhou had been there. That fact was like a thin thorn pricking his heart. It's not hate, nor emotion, but something more complicated. It forced Shen Yu'an to re-examine his past and present lives, and also had to re-examine the person Lu Chenzhou. There was a knock on the study door. Zhou Jibai opened the door and put a document on the table. "Mr. Shen, the garage found it." The surveillance backup was copied once that year, and the person who copied it used an overseas encrypted account, which was traced back to the end and was related to a security company under the name of Lu Wenchuan. Shen Yu'an raised his eyes. "Does Lu Chenzhou know?" Zhou Jibai paused. He has been with Lu Chenzhou for 8 years and has dealt with countless difficult situations, but every time he faces a direct problem like Shen Yu'an, he has the illusion of being forced into a corner. "Mr. Lu is checking." Shen Yu'an smiled faintly. "Is it being checked, or has it been checked a long time ago?" Zhou Jibai was silent. "The answer is self-evident." Shen Yu'an didn't get angry, just put the screenshot back on the table. "This is not the first day I've known that he would hide something. But I need to know whether he is hiding it because he does not know how to say it, or because he is also standing in that net." "Mr. Shen." Zhou Jibai finally spoke, "Mr. Lu can't possibly harm you." Shen Yu'an looked at him. "You believe him because you have been with him for 8 years. I'm different, I died once." Zhou Jibai was speechless. That sentence of dying once is too harsh. So heavy that any guarantee seems light in front of it. In the evening, Lu Chenzhou returned to the mountainside villa. As soon as he entered, he noticed something was wrong in the atmosphere. The lighting in the living room was very dim. Shen Yu'an was sitting on the sofa with the security company information in front of him. Lu Chenzhou stopped. "You found it." Not a question, but a statement. Shen Yu'an laughed. Mr. Lu didn't even bother to pretend to be surprised. Lu Chenzhou took off his coat and walked to sit opposite him. "What do you want to ask?" "After the car accident in my previous life, who else besides you had been at the scene?" Lu Chenzhou's eyes darkened. Shen Yu'an stared at him, not giving him a chance to avoid it. "Don't tell me you don't know." The monitoring was missing for 7 minutes, and the people from Lu Wenchuan had moved the backup. "You had been to the scene in your previous life, and you have dreamed about it again in this life. Lu Chenzhou, you must know what happened in those 7 minutes." Lu Chenzhou was silent for a long time. It has been so long that the newly established trust in Shen Yu'an's heart has become colder. Finally, Lu Chenzhou whispered, "I only remember part of it." Shen Yu'an's fingertips slowly tightened. "Say, you were still alive when I arrived. The car door was stuck and I couldn't pry it open, so I had to reach in through the broken passenger window. You were bleeding, unconscious, and calling Guyanci's name." Shen Yu'an had already heard this part. But what Lu Chenzhou said next made him freeze instantly. Later, a car stopped not far away. Someone came down to take a look and left again. Shen Yu'an took a breath. Who? Lu Chenzhou looked at him with unspeakable pain in his eyes. Gu Yanxi. The room seemed to suddenly lose its sound. Shen Yu'an thought that he had no feelings for Gu Yanxi a long time ago, but when he heard this answer, his heart still felt like it was cut hard by a blunt knife. In his previous life, the person he was waiting for before his death really came. He just glanced at it and left again. Shen Yu'an slowly lowered his head and smiled. The laughter was very soft, but Zhou Jibai couldn't help but feel cold even when he was standing far away. It turns out he didn't come. Lu Chenzhou reached out to touch him, but stopped in midair. Shen Yu'an looked up, his eyes almost calm. He came, but he chose to let me die. Lu Chenzhou's Adam's apple moved slightly. Shen Yu'an. Why didn't you tell me this earlier? Lu Chenzhou could not answer. Because he knew that this matter was more cruel than Gu Yanxi harming the Shen family. If Gu Yanxi had never appeared, Shen Yu'an could still hate it. But he had been here, he had seen it, and he clearly had the opportunity to call the police and call for rescue, but he turned around and left. This is the knife that really crushes Shen Yu'an's last obsession with his past life. Shen Yu'an stood up, his voice cold and hollow. Very good. I have recorded this account. Lu Chenzhou watched him turn around and go upstairs without pursuing him. Zhou Jibai asked in a low voice, Mr. Lu, why didn't you tell Mr. Shen that Gu Yanxi didn't come alone at that time? Lu Chenzhou closed his eyes. Now is not the time. Because in that car, besides Gu Yanxi, there is another name that Shen Yu'an can't bear now. Lu Wenchuan. And a transaction recording that is enough to drag Lu Group into the abyss. Shen Yu'an went to Shen Group early the next morning. He did not ask Lu Chenzhou any more about the car accident scene. It was not that he had given up, but that he knows too well that he can't be led by his emotions now. Gu Yanxi has been to the scene and left in his previous life. This incident will become the coldest knife in Shen Yu'an's heart. However, the knife is not used to hold and hurt oneself, but to stab back. The Shen Group reorganization meeting ran from 9 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Shen Chongshan is still cooperating with the investigation. Although Shen Mingyuan woke up, he was controlled by the police. Everyone inside Shen Group is in danger. The board of directors supports Shen Yu'an on the surface, but in reality they are still waiting and watching. Shen Yu'an sat next to the main seat in the conference room, and cut off the shell suppliers left by Shen Mingyuan one by one, re-examined the project budget, and asked the legal and financial departments to review the data for 3 years. Some people questioned him for being too radical. Shen Yu'an only said one sentence, Shen Group is not sick. Someone poured poison into its blood vessels. If we don't cut off the rotten flesh now, no one will have to live until the poison enters the heart. The conference room fell silent for a moment. No one spoke anymore. After the meeting, Lin Jiyue put a brown paper bag on his desk. You asked me to check the intersection between Lu Chenzhou and the Shen family, and I found a photo. Shen Yu'an was originally signing documents when his hand stopped for a moment. What photo? Lin Jiyue did not answer directly, only motioning for him to see for himself. Shen Yu'an opened the paper bag, and inside was a yellowed old photo. The background of the photo is a hospital corridor. It was raining outside the window. As a teenager, Shen Yu'an was wearing a white shirt and holding a black umbrella in his hand, which he was handing to a teenager sitting on a bench. The young man lowered his head, his clothes were soaked, and his side face was pale and sharp. Shen Yu'an stared at the photo for a long time. He recognizes himself. He was 17 that year, and his mother had just completed an operation. He stayed with the bed in the hospital, and when he left, he met a boy who was soaked all over. The young man looked very bad and there was blood on his hands. He thought the other person was scolded by his family or had an accident, so he handed him the umbrella. That's just a small thing. It's so small that Shen Yu'an has long been forgotten. But the boy in the photo is Lu Chenzhou. Shen Yu'an's fingertips froze. Where did this photo come from? I dug it out of the old hospital files. Lin Jius said, there was a charity ward promotional shoot, and the photos were stored in the database. Didn't you ask me to check Lu Chenzhou's early information? I compared many old photos to confirm that it was him. Shen Yu'an said nothing. He suddenly understood what Lu Chenzhou's phrase a long time ago meant. It turned out that Lu Chenzhou had not only noticed Shen Group after it fell into trouble. His obsession with him had not begun because of the car accident in the previous life. Their intersection happened earlier. As early as when Shen Yu'an had not learned to take precautions, and Lu Chenzhou was not yet the current leader of Lu Group, there had already been a brief and insignificant brush with each other. Lin Jiu looked at his face and whispered, Yuan, I know you don't want your feelings to affect your judgment. But this photo at least shows that Lu Chenzhou's obsession with you may not be temporary. Shen Yu'an put the photo back on the table. Obsession does not equal sincerity. It doesn't mean it's a calculation. Shen Yu'an looked up at him. Lin Jiu sighed, I'm not speaking for him. I'm just reminding you, don't assume that everyone close to you is fake just because Guyanci is fake. Shen Yu'an was silent. This sentence hits the mark. The injuries Guyanci caused in his previous life had made him regard trust as an almost dangerous thing. The more true Lu Chenzhou is, the less he dares to touch it. Because fake love hurts people, and true love can also trap people. In the afternoon, Lu Chenzhou came to Shen Group to pick him up. Shen Yu'an stood in front of the office window, still holding the photo in his hand. Lu Chenzhou opened the door and came in. When he saw the photo, his steps paused slightly. Shen Yu'an turned back. You recognize this photo? Lu Chenzhou did not deny it. I recognize it. Have you saved it? Have one. Shen Yu'an smiled. Mr. Lu's collection is quite extensive. These words were stinging, but Lu Chenzhou had no excuse. Shen Yu'an put the photo on the table. I just gave you an umbrella that day. Lu Chenzhou looked at the photo, his eyes softened rarely. I know. So you shouldn't take me too seriously just because of an umbrella. Lu Chenzhou raised his eyes. It's not because of the umbrella. What's that for? Lu Chenzhou was quiet for a long time before whispering, because before that day, no one cared whether I got caught in the rain. Shen Yuan's heart suddenly seemed to be touched by something. He thought of the boy in the photo, wet, silent and embarrassed, like a young animal abandoned by the whole world. Shen Yu'an couldn't say anything harsh at the moment. Lu Chenzhou looked at him, his voice was steady but low, I know you are just convenient. But Shen Yu'an, some people will remember even the kindness of others for a long time when they live to a certain point. The room fell silent. Shen Yu'an lowered his eyes and avoided his sight. He shouldn't be soft-hearted. But Lu Chenzhou always used the clumsiest and most direct way to pry open the places that had been nailed shut by Shen Yu'an's previous life. After a long time, he pushed the photo back to Lu Chenzhou. Take it away. Lu Chenzhou did not take it. You keep it. Why? Prove that I didn't suddenly want you. Shen Yu'an's fingertips paused. Lu Chenzhou added, it also proves that if I sometimes don't do well, it's not because I'm not sincere, but because I learned too late. Shen Yu'an looked up at him. At that moment, he suddenly realized that what he feared most was not Lu Chenzhou plotting against him. But Lu Chenzhou really loves him. Because sincerity is more difficult to deal with than conspiracy. Conspiracy can fight back. Sincerity will only make people shaken. The Gu family was not defeated by the first loss. On the contrary, Gu Yanci made a very smart and vicious choice after 3 days of silence. He no longer defends the box video, nor does he deny that he ever used Shen Yu'an. He turned his attention to Lu Chenzhou. An anonymous long article was sent out at 3 o'clock in the morning. The title of the article is Shen Yu'an really free? A controlling marriage between Lu Group's powerful heir and a bankrupt young master? The long article is half true and half false. It listed the details of Lu Chenzhou visiting Shen Group on the eve of the crisis, quickly signing a prenuptial agreement, asking Shen Yu'an to move into the Lu family, arranging Lu Group's legal intervention for Shen Group, and forcibly kissing Shen Yu'an in public. Everything is based on facts, but is repackaged into an elaborate emotional captivity. What's even more vicious is that the article includes a photo at the end. In the photo, Shen Yu'an is sitting in the Lu family's car with a pale face. Lu Chenzhou lowers his head and approaches him, looking like he is forcibly suppressing him. That was actually the moment when Shen Yu'an had a stomachache after returning from the hospital, and Lu Chenzhou adjusted his seatbelt for him. But the camera angle is very tricky. Enough to convince the uninformed that Shen Yu'an was not doing well in the Lu family. At 6 o'clock in the morning, public opinion exploded. The phone number of Shen Group's public relations department was bombarded with calls, and Shen Yuan's personal mobile phone also received countless strange messages. Some people scolded him for his self-destruction, some advised him to escape from Lu Chenzhou, and some said that he was simply joining forces with Lu Group for hype, and Gu Yanxi was the one who really wanted to save him. Shen Yu'an was sitting in the restaurant of the Lu family, looking eerily calm after reading the long article. Lu Chenzhou sat across from him with a cold expression. "I'll take care of it." Shen Yu'an raised his eyes. "How are you going to deal with it?" "Remove the trending topic, trace the source, and send a lawyer's letter." "Then what?" Lu Chenzhou looked at him. Shen Yu'an said calmly, "Then everyone will think you have a guilty conscience. Gu Yanxi just wants you to take action. The tougher it is, the more controlling it becomes." Lu Chenzhou was silent. Of course he understands. But he couldn't stand those people pushing Shen Yu'an into the center of rumors again, and he couldn't stand Gu Yanxi's malicious intent of packaging itself in so-called freedom. Shen Yu'an put down the tablet. "You can't come forward this time. You want to do it yourself?" "No." Shen Yu'an had a little coldness in his eyes. "Let Shen Group come." At 10 o'clock in the morning, Shen Group held a temporary media briefing. The person who came forward was not Shen Yu'an, but Shen Group's new public relations manager and Lin Jiyue. They did not respond to whether Lu Chenzhou controls Shen Yu'an, nor did they explain the seemingly ambiguous photos. They only released 3 documents. The first one is a record of recent payments made by the Gu family PR company to multiple anonymous accounts. The second one is a screenshot of the communication between the account where the anonymous long article originated and the Gu Yanxi assistant. The third is a formal report receipt of Shen Group, accusing someone of maliciously spreading false information and interfering with the normal operations of listed companies. At the end of the briefing, Lin Jiyue only said one sentence. "Whether Mr. Shen Yu'an is free or not cannot be determined by an anonymous account. However, anyone who tries to use public opinion to control his life again will be held accountable according to law." This sentence quickly became a hot search topic. Public opinion began to reverse. But Gu Yanxi has achieved half its purpose. He successfully brought the outside world's attention back to the marriage relationship between Lu Chenzhou and Shen Yu'an. In the afternoon, Shen Yu'an received a call from Gu Yanxi. He originally didn't want to answer, but Lu Chenzhou was sitting next to him, with eyes so cold that he could kill someone through his cell phone. Shen Yu'an suddenly changed his mind. He pressed speakerphone. Gu Yanxi's voice came out with tired tenderness. "Yuan, I know you hate me. But can't you really see it? Lu Chenzhou is more dangerous than me." Shen Yu'an leaned back in his chair. "Gu Yanxi, it's not easy for you to pretend to be me now. I admit that I made mistakes." Gu Yanxi whispered, "But at least I didn't lock you into a marriage." Lu Chenzhou's fingers on the table tightened slightly. Shen Yu'an saw it. He suddenly reached out and pressed the back of Lu Chenzhou's hand. Lu Chenzhou froze. Shen Yu'an didn't look at him and just said to the other end of the phone, "You are wrong." Gu Yanxi was silent. Shen Yu'an said in a calm voice, "I chose this marriage myself. Lu Chenzhou has many problems, but at least he has never been like you, saying he loves me while watching me die." There was sudden silence on the other end of the phone. Shen Yu'an continued, "You have been to the scene of the car accident in your previous life." Gu Yanxi's breathing was obviously messed up. "What are you talking about?" "You saw me." Shen Yu'an's voice finally turned cold. "Then you left." Gu Yanxi didn't speak for a long time. The silence was too long, long enough that the answer was already clear. Shen Yu'an hung up the phone. The living room was so quiet that only the two of them breathed. Lu Chenzhou lowered his head and looked at Shen Yu'an's hand on the back of his hand. Shen Yu'an just realized it and took it back immediately. Lu Chenzhou whispered, "Thank you." Shen Yu'an said with a cold face, "Not for you." "I know." But the glimmer in Lu Chenzhou's eyes still made Shen Yu'an confused for a moment. He suddenly had a premonition. Gu Yanxi's counterattack this time is not just for public opinion. He's forcing Lu Chenzhou to lose control. Once Lu Chenzhou gets out of control, the people who are really hiding deep in Lu Group will start to take action. After Gu Yanxi's call, Lu Chenzhou became quiet. Not the usual cold silence, but a silence that was pressed to the deepest level. Shen Yu'an could see that he was enduring it. Endure the anger, endure the murderous intention, and also endure not deciding how to fight back for Shen Yu'an. This endurance should have satisfied Shen Yu'an. But he was inexplicably irritable. At 10 o'clock in the evening, when Shen Yu'an returned to the master bedroom, Lu Chenzhou was sitting by the window reading documents. The light fell on the side of his face, casting a deep shadow on his brow bone. The cuff of his left arm was rolled up, and the old scar that appeared from the dream in his previous life was exposed in the dim light, like a silent crack. Shen Yu'an stopped looking for a moment, then quickly looked away. "You won't sleep?" Lu Chenzhou looked up. "There's something else." "What about Lu Group?" "Yeah. Is it related to Lu Wenchuan?" Lu Chenzhou was silent for a second. "Yeah." Shen Yu'an raised an eyebrow. I answered quickly this time. Lu Chenzhou looked at him. "You don't like me hiding it from you." These words were too blunt, and Shen Yu'an's originally prepared sarcasm suddenly got stuck. He walked to the sofa and sat down, picked up the information on the table and took a look. Lu Group Overseas Fund, Shishin Capital, and the Gu Family Public Relations Company, 3 lines are intertwined, pointing to a board meeting that Lu Wenchuan is promoting recently. Shen Yu'an's face darkened after reading it. "He wants to force you out of the Shen Group case." "Yeah. The reason is that your private marriage affects Lu Group risk control?" "Yes." Shen Yu'an laughed. Gu Yanxi's long article was not written for me, but for the Lu Group board of directors. Lu Chenzhou showed a little approval in his eyes. "You can see it." Shen Yu'an said coldly, "No need to praise, I don't like to be treated as a student." "I didn't." "You have it in your eyes." Lu Chenzhou paused slightly, as if he was seriously reflecting on his eyes. Shen Yu'an was originally in a bad mood, but seeing him like this made him want to laugh. He held back forcefully and continued to flip through the information. "What are you going to do?" "Let him propose." "You want to use the board of directors to catch him?" "Yeah." "What's the price?" Lu Chenzhou looked at him and didn't answer. Shen Yu'an closed the file and his eyes became cold. "Lu Chenzhou, don't do this again. If you want to induce Lu Wenchuan to expose more financial lines, you must make Lu Group internally believe that you really lost your judgment because of me. In this game, I am the bait, right?" Lu Chenzhou was silent. Shen Yu'an's anger suddenly rose. "You made arrangements for me again. I will keep you safe." "The issue is not safety." Shen Yu'an stood up suddenly. "Lu Chenzhou, do you understand I am not afraid of danger? What I am afraid of is that everyone thinks they can put me into the game without asking me. This is true for Gu Yanxi, this is true for Shen Yu'an, and the same is true for you." Lu Chenzhou's face changed slightly. "I'm not them." "Then don't do the same thing." The room fell silent instantly. Shen Yu'an's chest rose and fell, and his eyes shone with coldness. He knew he was overreacting. But this isn't the first time. Lu Chenzhou was always like this. He was obviously learning to respect him, but at the truly critical moment, he instinctively kept Shen Yu'an under his control. That might be protection. But what Shen Yu'an hated most in his previous life was that his knowledge and choices were deprived of him in the name of protection. Lu Chenzhou stood up and walked to him. "I'm sorry." This was not the first time Shen Yu'an had heard these 3 words. Shen Yu'an did not let this dissuade him. "I don't want to hear I'm sorry anymore. Lu Chenzhou whispered, "Then what do you want?" Shen Yu'an looked at him. "I want you to treat me as a partner, not your property, not your responsibility, not your regret for not being able to save me from your previous life." This sentence was like a knife, piercing Lu Chenzhou's heart accurately. His eyes visibly trembled. Shen Yu'an saw it, but did not take it back. "If you don't say some things now, they will only become deeper cracks later." Lu Chenzhou was silent for a long time. "Okay." Shen Yu'an sneered, "You always say yes." "I'll change it this time." "How to change it?" Lu Chenzhou pushed the board information on the table to him. "Tomorrow's game is up to you." Shen Yu'an was startled. Lu Chenzhou looked at him and said in a low voice, "I didn't arrange for you to join the game, it was you who decided how I would cooperate." This is not a nice thing to say. The Lu Group Board of Directors is Lu Chenzhou's battlefield. His willingness to hand over the initiative is a huge concession in itself. Shen Yu'an looked down at the information, and the anger in his chest slowly sank, turning into another indescribable emotion. "Are you sure?" "Yeah." "What if I make you suffer?" "Then eat." Shen Yu'an looked up at him. Lu Chenzhou's eyes are steady. "Shen Yu'an, marriage can be a transaction, but you are not." This sentence is like a stone thrown into deep water. Shen Yu'an's fingers tightened slightly. After a long time, he picked up the information. "Then just listen to me." Lu Chenzhou said, "Okay." This time, Shen Yu'an did not ridicule him again. The game that Shen Yu'an set for Lu Chenzhou was very simple, even so simple that when Zhou Jibai listened to it for the first time, he couldn't help but frown. "Mr. Shen, this will make Mr. Lu very passive on the board of directors." Shen Yu'an was sitting in the small restroom outside Lu Group's conference room, flipping through the information with his fingertips. "What I want is for him to look passive." Zhou Jibai looked toward Lu Chenzhou. Lu Chenzhou looked calm, "Do as he said." Zhou Jibai had to shut up. There are only 3 core steps in the plan. First, Lu Chenzhou did not actively refute Lu Wenchuan's accusation that private marriage affects Lu Group's decision-making. Second, let Lu Wenchuan promote the risk control review team and force him to put more related funds on the table. Third, Shen Yu'an, as the agent decision-maker of Shen Group, disclosed a Shen Group restructuring plan after the meeting, positioning Lu Group's capital injection as a market-oriented creditors' rights cooperation rather than a marriage ancillary transaction. In other words, Lu Chenzhou takes a step back inside the board of directors, and Shen Yu'an takes a step back for him outside. This is not protecting versus being protected. It was mutual leverage. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the Lu Group board meeting began. Shen Yu'an did not enter. He sat in the break room and looked at the meeting minutes that were compiled simultaneously. Lu Wenchuan really got angry. His tone was gentle, but every word was sharp. Chenzhou is young and it is understandable that he is emotional. But Lu Group is not his personal property. The Shen Group crisis involves financial fraud, criminal investigation, and major public opinion risks. Lu Group's involvement is too deep. Whether it will harm the interests of shareholders must be re-evaluated. Several directors chimed in. Lu Chenzhou did not press hard as usual, but simply said, "It can be evaluated." Lu Wenchuan was obviously a bit surprised. He was originally prepared to make Lu Chenzhou angry, but as long as Lu Chenzhou forcibly suppressed him on the spot, he could truly claim to have lost judgment for Shen Yu'an. But Lu Chenzhou is too calm. He was so calm that he seemed ready to hand Lu Wenchuan the knife. The more this happens, the less Lu Wenchuan dares to stop easily. He could only move forward with the risk control review team. This played right into Shen Yu'an's hands. Before the meeting ended, the review panel list was released, including 3 companies with previous dealings with Qixing Capital. These people were originally hiding in the dark, but now they have to jump out on their own in order to check and balance Lu Chenzhou. Shen Yu'an looked at the list with a sneer in his eyes. Bit the hook. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Shen Group held a restructuring conference. This is the first time that Shen Yu'an has officially stood on the stage as the person in charge of Shen Group's crisis management. He was wearing a dark suit, his face was still pale, but his eyes were very steady. The media gathered in the audience, and everyone was waiting for him to tell the true relationship between Shen Group and Lu Group. Shen Yu'an has no avoidance. Lu Group's financial support for Shen Group is a bridge financing cooperation based on market risk assessment and commercial returns. It is not a prelude to the sale of control of Shen Group, nor is it an accessory to any marriage relationship. The reporter immediately asked, but the outside world believes that the marriage between Mr. Shen and Mr. Lu is a prerequisite for cooperation. Shen Yu'an looked toward the camera. My marriage to Lu Chenzhou has indeed established a higher level of trust between the two parties. But trust is not a bargaining chip, and Shen Group will not give up the bottom line of corporate governance because of my personal relationship. This sentence is very beautiful. It not only recognizes the existence of marriage, but also cuts off business responsibilities. In the Lu Group board of directors, those who had just questioned Lu Chenzhou soon saw the live broadcast. Some were silent, others frowned. Because Shen Yu'an's press conference was equivalent to blocking the accusation of benefit transfer for Lu Chenzhou. Lu Wenchuan looked at the screen, his eyes becoming cold for the first time. He realized he had underestimated Shen Yu'an. That is not a beautiful young man who will only be protected by Lu Chenzhou, but a person who has begun to know how to use the language of capital to fight back. After the press conference, Shen Yu'an returned to the background. Lu Chenzhou stood there waiting for him. The two looked at each other a few steps apart. Shen Yu'an raised his eyebrows. Mr. Lu, you were saved by me once, how do you feel? Lu Chenzhou looked at him with a faint smile in his eyes. Very good. Shen Yu'an originally just stabbed him casually, but these two words made his heart skip a beat. Lu Chenzhou came closer and helped him straighten the cuffs that had been wrinkled by the microphone cord. The movements are natural and restrained. Shen Yu'an wanted to move away, but felt guilty if he did. I had to stand there with a cold face. Lu Chenzhou whispered, "Good job today." I said, "You don't need to treat me as a student." Not a student. What's that? Lu Chenzhou looked up at him. It's someone you can stand side by side with. Shen Yu'an was suddenly speechless. He had waited too long for these words. In his previous life, no one regarded him as someone who could stand alongside them. His father protects him, Gu Yanxi controls him, and Shen Mingyuan exploits him. Everyone feels that Shen Yu'an does not understand, should not know, and does not need to participate. Only Lu Chenzhou, who had obviously made the same mistake before, gave up his position at this moment. Shen Yu'an lowered his eyes and spoke softly. Remember what you said today. Lu Chenzhou said, I can. But none of them knew that this promise would soon be torn apart by the greater truth. After the Shen Group restructuring press conference, the situation of Shen Yu'an has changed significantly. Those who used to only regard him as the Shen family's beautiful young master began to have to admit that he could really handle the Shen Group crisis. Several cooperative banks have re-engaged with Shen Group, and two companies that had originally suspended supply also expressed their willingness to resume cooperation. But this recovery did not let Shen Yu'an relax. He knew Lu Wenchuan would fight back. Sure enough, 3 days later, a batch of Shen Group internal information was anonymously sent to the regulatory agency. The information is mixed with authenticity, some are fake accounts manipulated by Shen Mingyuan, and some are payment records deliberately spliced together. Once the regulatory authorities conduct in-depth investigations, the progress of the Shen Group restructuring will inevitably be slowed down. What's even more troublesome is that this batch of information involves Shen Chongshan. Although Shen Yu'an knew that his father was not the mastermind, if the evidence is interpreted maliciously, it may still extend the investigation period for his father. Shen Yu'an was in a meeting at Shen Group when he received the message. He immediately asked Lin Jiyue to sort out counter-evidence and prepare to submit complete materials on his own initiative. But just when he was about to take action, Lu Chenzhou had already asked Lu Group's legal affairs to intervene, and used Lu Group's connections to suppress some media leaks in the regulatory process. When the news reached Shen Yu'an's ears, his face instantly turned cold. He went directly to Lu Group. Lu Chenzhou was meeting someone in the office. Shen Yu'an didn't wait for the announcement and pushed the door open. Several executives in the office were silent at the same time. Lu Chenzhou raised his eyes, saw Shen Yu'an's face, and knew what the problem was. Go out first. The executives left quickly. After the door closed, Shen Yu'an threw the file on his desk. Who asked you to move? Lu Chenzhou stood up. It's an emergency. So you can just not tell me? I only dealt with the risk of leakage first. Are you just? Shen Yu'an laughed angrily. Lu Chenzhou, do you think that as long as the result is good for me, it doesn't matter whether I know about the process or not? Lu Chenzhou frowned. If the information is leaked, your father will be dragged into deeper trouble. That's the Shen family's business too. You are also from the Shen family. So it's up to me to decide how to deal with it. Shen Yuan's voice is not loud, but every word is filled with fire. He thought Lu Chenzhou had really changed. But when things got urgent, the man still subconsciously put him in a protected position and blocked all dangers in front of him. If it were someone else, they might be moved. But Shen Yu'an just felt suffocated. Because he was excluded from the truth step by step in his previous life. Lu Chenzhou looked at him with suppressed emotions in his eyes. I can't watch your father being dragged down any longer. Shen Yu'an was startled. Lu Chenzhou said in a low voice, in your previous life, your father's condition worsened due to the prolongation of the investigation. You begged many people at that time, but no one helped you. The room fell silent for a moment. Shen Yuan's anger was pierced by these words, revealing deeper wounds. The scene of his father being rescued in the hospital from his previous life once again surfaced. He knelt in the hallway, grabbed Gu Yanxi's hand and said, please help my dad. Gu Yanxi hugged him and said he would find a way, but turned around and took away Shen Group's last mortgageable asset. Had Lu Chenzhou dreamed of these two or had he checked them out, Shen Yu'an did not know. He only knew that the reason behind Lu Chenzhou's unauthorized attack this time was not control, but fear. But fear cannot be a reason to deprive him again. Shen Yu'an closed his eyes and his voice became colder. Lu Chenzhou, I know you are afraid of a repeat of your past life. Lu Chenzhou looked at him. But I'm also afraid. This sentence made Lu Chenzhou freeze. Shen Yu'an raised his eyes, and there was an uncontrollable redness under his eyes. What I'm afraid of is not losing, getting hurt, or facing those people again. What I'm afraid of is that even though I've been reborn, I can still only stand there and watch everyone make decisions for me. Lu Chenzhou's Adam's apple rolled, but he could not speak. Shen Yu'an took the file back. I will handle this matter myself. I will not hold you responsible for what you have already done. But next time something like this happens, I will move out directly without waiting for the contract to expire. After saying that, he turned and left. Lu Chenzhou stood there and slowly tightened his fingers. When Zhou Jibai came in, he saw a low pressure in the office. Mr. Lu. Lu Chenzhou closed his eyes. I did something wrong again. Zhou Jibai was silent for a moment. It's rare for him to see Lu Chenzhou admit his mistakes, and it's even rarer for him to show such an almost helpless expression outside of business judgment. It's not that Mr. Shen doesn't understand your intentions. Zhou Jibai whispered, he just can't be excluded from his destiny anymore. Lu Chenzhou whispered, I know. But between knowing and doing it, there is the rain in the previous life that cannot be saved. Every time he wanted to take a step back, the blood-covered Shen Yu'an in his memory would drag him back out of control. He was too scared. He was afraid that if he were a little slower, Shen Yu'an would die in front of him again.